What's up everybody, it's Izzy, and what I want to talk about in this video is the idea of minimalism versus maximalism in your training. So first let's define the terms. Minimalism very simply is the idea that you want to do the minimum effective amount to get a positive measurable response. So the best way to think about this is with training volume. Do the smallest amount of training volume possible to get the most return on your investment. Maximalism, on the other hand, is a very different idea where you're trying to get the maximum possible results. And you don't care if that negatively influences the ratio of work that you put in to the results that you get. So if you could imagine a curve showing the results that you get versus the amount of work that you put in, it would look like this. Increasing at a decreasing rate, and some people would argue that it eventually starts to decrease again. But the point is that for somebody who's looking for the most amount of results possible, they're going to do everything. They're going to do all the most training that they can, versus somebody who's doing the minimal effective dose wants to get the best return on their investment. Now there are practical problems with both of these ideas once you start putting them to the test in the real world. Number one is that with minimalism, it's hard to, you have to define what the minimal acceptable level of progress is. Like, what unit are we talking about here? 1 pound on your bench press per year, 1 pound on your bench press per month, 1 pound on your bench press per week, per workout, I don't know, per set. This is all going to take a very different level of training. So once we get outside of theory, it's not as applicable in the real world. Now there are some issues with maximalism as well. Like, that's hard to pin down what the maximum amount of training volume that you can do is, especially because for a lot of people, this is heavily influenced by their current circumstances and their life conditions. And those can change at any time, whether you're dieting, whether you're gaining weight, your level of stress at work, how much sleep you're getting, if you have kids or not. These things change over time. And again, most people just aren't even in a position to even set up a lifestyle where it's feasible to do the truly maximal amount that their body can recover from in terms of training volume. And the best example that I can use to illustrate this is Stan Efferding. So for those of you who are not familiar with this story, Stan Efferding was a soccer player in high school, I believe, it could be college. And he was basically told that he needed to stop and lift weights because he wasn't muscular enough for soccer, which is, traditionally not a sport that requires a ton of muscle. But anyway, apparently he fell in love with weightlifting, kind of became a passion of his. As he went through his life, he later became very, very wealthy through his business ventures, and he decided later in life that he wanted to pursue his becoming a pro bodybuilder. He got an IFBB pro card, and in order for him to do this, somebody with whose self-professed genetics aren't that great, he flew to a completely different area, hired a professional coach by the name of Flex Wheeler, who many of you will recognize as a very famous bodybuilder who many consider to have one of the greatest physiques of all time, at least in his peak. He ate high quality cuts of steak for every single meal. He had a masseuse basically on hand where he would get a massage after every single workout. He slept for 9 to 10 hours a day and had an hour and a half nap on top of that. And this is to say nothing of the supplement expenses. So for most people, even setting up circumstances like this is completely infeasible. There's no way it could happen. They can't afford it. They have no desire to do so. All of those things converge. And that's why, again, in the real world, in the vast majority of circumstances, minimalism versus maximalism, or kind of the more moderate approach versus the all or nothing, so to speak, approach, it doesn't matter. It's bullshit to even think about it, because in practical terms, no one is living at either end of the extreme. Occasionally, we do find some Stan Efferding types, and maybe there is somebody on that minimalist side of things, like for example, say a investment banker who just wants to have a good physique, but he doesn't care at all about lifting and dieting, he has no passion for it. He just wants to look good. So he wants to put in the minimal amount of time for the maximum amount of effort. So these types of scenarios do exist, obviously, right? However, most of us, on most things, fall into a completely different category, in my opinion, that I would say is neither minimalist nor maximalist, but rather as much as you can. So it's not moderation, it's not all or nothing, it's as much as you can. As much as you can within the circumstances of your current lifestyle and whatever your goals are. Most people neither want the minimal amount of training to get the most results, they don't care about the ratio of effort expended, nor can they afford to make their whole life all about sleeping and eating and lifting. Okay? So what most people want is while currently living their preferred lifestyle to get the best possible results. And that's totally fine. Like that's how all of us do pretty much everything as far as when it comes to goals. There's very few people that have a singular mindset around one goal. One goal is all that matters for that entire period of time. And I think we can all admire these people to some extent, but it's just not most of us. It's not me, it's probably not you. However, what we don't do, especially in these circumstances, is try to blow smoke up these people's ass and tell them that something that's bad for them is good for them. However, we do this to people who aren't on one of the extremes of that spectrum all the time. And I don't understand it, and that's what this video is really going to be about. So for example, if I went to Stan Efferding and I was like, look man, this whole pro bodybuilder thing that you're doing, it's really cool and all, props bro, but you know, it's a little too much. You're just doing a little too much. You know, you should be a little bit more moderate in your approach, and you know, it's not going to hurt you to have a few beers on the weekend with your boys, okay? It's totally normal. It's going to help you balance your life. You're going to avoid burnout doing that. Hopefully you can realize that that's horseshit. That's bullshit. Like maybe that's true if his goal wasn't to become a freaking IFBB pro bodybuilder. However, if somebody gave that exact same advice to somebody who just wanted to have a six-pack or look jacked at the beach, it's probably correct. Because the thing is that a small amount of alcohol is not going to completely ruin your progress, especially if you know, you're not trying to take that maximal approach to get everything out of it that you can. However, it is a lie to act like it's not going to have any negative benefit or any negative effect, right? It has some negative effect. It's just not going to be enough to deter most goals. And that's really where I want to come at this from, is if you can understand the training analogy, since you know 99.9999% of you who watch my videos lift regularly, then you can understand how this applies to any other aspect of life, whether that is social media, other media consumption, TV shows, movies, blah blah blah, music, whatever. There is going to be a trade-off for things, and more often than not, a small amount of something that is generally negative is not going to be enough to ruin your chances of achieving your goals. We all recognize that. However, for some reason, we like to tell ourselves that just because those things don't eliminate your chances or have a very small impact in small doses, that they're not actually negative. But it's just wrong. And there's no reason to do that. There's no reason to lie about it. Instead, just be honest with yourself about what you're doing. You're saying, I enjoy this. I know it's not the best use of my time. I know it's not necessarily adding positive value at all. It might be maybe a little bit, but maybe not at all. And that's totally fine, as long as it's not interfering with the lifestyle that you want to live and the goals that you have. We all recognize that. But again, there's no need to pretend like it's something other than it is, which is a negative influence. And again, this brings me back to the whole point of this video. Minimalism versus maximalism, it doesn't matter for most of us, because most of us aren't living at either extreme on most of our goals. We want neither to get the best results for the least amount of effort, nor the absolute most possible results while making our whole life about that one goal. What we want is just the best results that we can get out of the things that we care about with the amount of time and effort that we are willing to expend. So it's neither all or nothing or moderation. It's as much as you can. And this is why I'm a pretty big believer in when you're trying to like install a new habit, it's better to be very extreme about it. And it's not because I expect 100% compliance or adherence, it's because it's as much as you can. And if you go 4 weeks at 99% adherence to a macro-based plan, you're going to get better results than if you had 80% adherence. It's very simple. Very, very simple. And you're going to acquire that new habit more quickly. So again, we all know that in the grand scheme of life, 80% adherence to like your diet or your training program is probably going to net you pretty good results. But we also know that 95% adherence would be even better. And we also know that 99% would be even better than that, although the difference might not be very noticeable in most areas. And we know from even further than that, that 99% and 99.99999% might be the difference between the person who gets 10th at the Olympics and the person who gets 1st. Okay? So that's all I have to say on this one. Hopefully it was interesting and insightful to both training and other aspects.